All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining our NUG meetup today. We're excited to have you here with us. We continue to bring you great presentations in this virtual setting as we wait to get back into physical presence. Hopefully, next year, we're planning to do one physical presence meeting once every quarter for 2023. So looking really forward to seeing some of you guys face to face. But like I said, until then, we continue to bring you great presentations and great speakers, and today is certainly no exception. We have Kevin Griffin with us today. He's going to be presenting on Tailwind Essentials for Developers. Kevin Griffin is an author, teacher, mentor, and consultant focused in software development. He is also a 13-time Microsoft MVP, lucky 13 there, specializing in ASP.NET, Microsoft Azure, and web application development. As an independent consultant, Kevin specializes in helping businesses push their technology stacks into the 21st century. You can often find Kevin speaking at conferences and user groups across the country or blogging at consultwithgriff.com. Welcome, Griff. Kevin.
Hey, everybody. I forgot how long that bio is. It was never really meant to be read aloud. It was always meant to be read and ignored on like conference websites. So I need to have a version that says, all right, if you're going to read it, just here's the one sentence snippet. But very glad to be here. Hi, everybody. All right.
Hi, Kevin.
Hello, Kevin.
Hi. So some audience participation would be requested. All right. Do you just want me to get started? What's the protocol here?
Yeah. So I mean, we can get started, and I think you kind of mentioned it. Some speakers have different preferences on questions and whatnot. I think so. I don't know if everybody knows you here, Kevin, and I think a lot of us do. You've been here, before physically and virtually. But if you don't mind, like, give everybody your style of how you want to field the collaboration here.
All right. Well, so ask me questions as they come up. Drop them in the chat. I'll have it off to the other screen. But let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll just kind of gradually walk through this because I have a little bit of a special way of delivering this talk. And we'll actually, since the first time I've done this talk virtually, I've only ever done this talk in person, which is crazy in these crazy times. So we'll see how well this works. All right, let's go share our screen. Yep. So make sure everyone is in the right place. This is Tailwind CSS Essentials for Developers. I hate these hide things. Let's get rid of those. I need some motivation because I'm a little bit unmotivated. And when we start talking about silly things like styling and CSS, as a developer, I just lose all motivation altogether. So I figured as a group, we should talk about motivation and what's the best way to motivate ourselves is buying my course. Not really. We are going to build a motivational poster. Y'all remember those motivational posters that have like the little kitty cat on it and it says hang in there, and it's like the landscape, and it's like the world is your oyster, and we're going to do one, but it's more non-motivational, right? It's I hate CSS, and we're going to build this into something that looks like something. All right, let's go ahead and let me bring up my notes here so I know what I'm doing, because I don't know what I'm doing. I never know what I'm doing. I'm going to run a npm script real fast, if I could spell it correctly. This is going to open up a web browser that I'm going to bring over here, and you all probably can't see any of that because it's super small and it's just a little bit of text up in the top of the screen. But we're going to put everything side by side, and we're going to start building out just a little simple layout. This actually works much better virtually, because sometimes when you're presenting, you don't have the full real estate and you have to zoom things in a ton just so people can see what's going on. All right, so motivational posters have a couple key things in common. And what's, someone just yell out, use the chat. What's one thing that's in common about all these motivational posters? Do you all know that? Once.
Big graphic background with some text.
They have a graphic. I'm going to save the graphic for last. But yes, they all have graphics. Let's start simple. They all have black backgrounds. So let's just say, well, I would love to add a class. I want to add a background, but I want it to be black. Okay. All right. That did something to my page. It made a black background. Well, now I can't see my text, right? Because the text is white. What if I could just change the color of the text to white? Boom. All right. Making progress. Now, I don't like the size of the element. So it's taking up too much width. I really need it to be half the width that it's taken up. Well, what if I could just say, well, width is half of what it is? All right. We're making some progress. Well, I also don't really like that it's in the off to the left. I want it to be in the middle. And anyone out there might know centering things in CSS is just an exercise in pain. Well, what's the easiest way to do this? I have a technically fixed width element. What if I could just say MX auto, so automatically margin it on the left and the right so it centers it. All right, that's actually kind of cool. Let me add a little bit of padding to the top and a little bit of margin to the top. And all right, we're starting to build out some of the layout for what's going to happen here. Let's talk about this text for a moment. It's just a paragraph tag. It's nothing special. I don't like it. I don't like that it's not centered. For now, it's centered. I don't like that it's too small. We should make it a little bit bigger. We should make it 3-4 times bigger than it is right now. We'll say, well, 3 extra large. All right. I want to add a little bit of padding around it, at least to the top, so it doesn't really impact my image I'm going to add in a moment. I really don't like that font. Like, the designer in me goes, that font is awful. We need to get rid of that. What if I just make it a much lovelier mono font? All right, there we go. I also don't like that some of the letters are lowercase. We just want uppercase all across the board. All right, I hate CSS. I'm getting motivated, folks. We are getting there. Now I have this pesky thing in the middle that should be an image, and it's not. So let's go add an image. Well, there's a couple ways that we can do the image. Oh, I need to turn off GitHub Copilot. This is going to screw up the entire thing. Oh, all right. So I know if you're not paying for GitHub Copilot, you should totally pay for GitHub Copilot, because when it's amazing, it is brilliantly amazing. Except when I'm doing demos, because then it gives away the demo. It's done that on more than one occasion. All right. Oh my gosh. Hold on. No, go away, Copilot. Let's reopen the file. There. No, Copilot. No. All right. Did it go away? All right, it went away. All right. I'm going to add a style to this. I know I said I wasn't really going to write any CSS, but I'm going to write some CSS for a moment. And that's just because doing these backgrounds is a little bit easier when you write CSS. Motivational dot GIF, huh? Save. All right. Didn't do anything. Well, why did it not do anything? That's because this div is 0 pixels by 0 pixels. It has no height or width to it. So let's fix that. We will set the width to 64. So 64 is a more relative term. We'll set the height to 64. You can see here in my little IntelliSense, 16 rem, which is about 256 pixels. We'll set those and we'll hit save. You can see where I'm going at now. The image is the right size, but everything is wrong with this image because it's not really where I need it to be. So let's play with this. Let's go ahead and margin auto it so it's centered, and let's play around with some background options. So I'll contain the image. Oh, that worked out really well. So you see it shrunk it down where we now fit within the width, but it's repeating itself. So you can see down here, I got a little bit of a repeat line, and it's just repeating the image. That's not what we want. What we want is a background no repeat. Hey, and that is more like it. And then finally, what if I wanted to add a border to it? If I have a white border going around the entire image. And I think that's actually a good place to stop. So what's that? In less than 5 minutes, we have gone from just a little bit of text and a couple elements on the screen to having a somewhat stylized elements on our page. And we didn't write any CSS, save for the background image. But I could have done the background image a couple different ways to get rid of that CSS. So effectively, I've done all this work without writing CSS, just using various class names that are pre-built into the system that we're going to talk about today, and that's Tailwind. So let's jump back into some slides for a moment. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Kevin Griffin. My slide is incorrect here. I'm a 13-time Microsoft MVP, focused in ASP.NET Core, Azure, and everything web development that I could get my hands on. If you ever like to talk to me afterwards, feel free to reach out to me, consultwithgriff.com, or I'm very active on the Twitter at @1kevgriff. I would love to chat with you. If you have any questions about this talk or just anything in ASP.NET Core, Azure, or web development. All right, so today we're going to talk about one of my favorite platforms, and that's Tailwind CSS. And I always start the conversation of Tailwind. If someone says, Kevin, what is Tailwind? Explain Tailwind to me. It's if CSS had an API, and not just an API, but a fluent API, where we're all developers. We have all used bad APIs. And what's a bad API? It's an API that doesn't really make any sense when you look at documentation. If you are making method calls, it wants unreasonable parameters. It's anything written in Java. It's just bad to use. It's like calling a RESTful API that returns 200 okay for everything, including errors. Those are just bad APIs. Tailwind, on the other hand, is if we were using a good Fluent API and everything made sense. Because just look at the example I just did. I wanted to contain a background image into an element. So I just said background contain. It's very fluent in its usage because it's like a fellow developer, sat down and thought about this stuff that you or I would want to use if we were writing a CSS framework, and they just built that. So we're going to go into this a little bit deeper. There's a fluent language for Tailwind that once you get a couple of the key aspects, you're just going to automatically know what to look for or what to write for anything else that you want to do. So a couple of things I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about setup and installation. Tailwind is a massive framework. And if you're using it in your applications now, you really need to have it behind some sort of Webpack, Vite, create React app, create Vue app, create Angular app, some sort of build system that is able to do tree shaking. Most major platforms today can do that. If you are rolling your own, you might have to do a little bit of extra work, or you'll have some additional bloat. The Vue example that I was showing you, that takes about 5 minutes to set up, and that's if I'm talking through it. If I just sat down and wrote the commands, it doesn't take that long at all. But you really want to have some sort of build system. And because this is virtual, we can talk about it a little bit more towards the end, if anyone would really like to dive into that. Now, there's this elephant in the room. When I mean elephant, I mean like big, fat, bloated elephant called Bootstrap. We're not going to talk about Bootstrap, except for the next 3 slides. Bootstrap, I'm not going to say anything bad about Bootstrap. Bootstrap is still an okay solution. Bootstrap came around at the right time when we as developers needed Bootstrap. Just like jQuery. Like you go back 15 years, jQuery, at this point, almost 20 years, right? You go back 20 years. jQuery came at the time where we were trying to write more JavaScript, and cross-platform support was horrible. So jQuery came in and said, hey, we'll just write this abstraction and we'll handle all the details for you across all the different browsers. It was amazing. And Bootstrap came to solve the same problem, trying to do layouts and basic elements that weren't ugly. Bootstrap came in and said, here's a set of tools that make this stuff much easier for you. There was one fundamental problem with Bootstrap. You kind of still see it today, not as much, but all Bootstrap sites kind of look the same. There is support for theming, better theming than what you would get out of the box. But you could look at a site and go, yeah, they use Bootstrap for that. I can tell. Even though your end user won't notice, you'll notice. And that's what's important. Other things about Bootstrap, they don't give you a ton of flexibility. Every issue I've ever had with Bootstrap is when I decide I want to do something that Bootstrap doesn't natively support out of the box. So if it positions an element a certain way, or they want to have a certain effect, every time I've tried to fight Bootstrap fights back with revenge. If I want to use a class name that Bootstrap has taken a hold of, it will actively work against you to make sure none of your stuff works. And a lot of their components, you have to use their JavaScript, their framework, in order to make it work the way that it's supposed to. And I have a fundamental problem with that because it's actively fighting against the work that I'm trying to do. So in this discussion, we're not going to talk about Bootstrap anymore, and we're not going to talk Bootstrap versus Tailwind, because that would be assumed to be an apples to apples comparison. They're not equals. They are solving different problems, and Tailwind is just like way better. So we'll talk about that. We have a lot to cover. And I'm not going to go terribly deep into one topic versus another because there's so much. But in general, we're going to talk about silly things like layout, putting elements on the screen, figuring out how wide, how tall they should be, that sort of thing, sizing. We'll talk a little bit about colors because colors are a thing that people like to see on web pages. And you usually have to colorize everything from text to backgrounds to borders and etc. We'll talk about typography, which is a little bit interesting because you might want to have a little bit of a creative flair to how your text is rendered on the screen. We'll talk about variants, and variants include basically their events. Hover events, when elements blur or they're in focus, is an element active or disabled, and so on. We'll briefly talk about responsive design because that's an important thing that people care about nowadays. And we'll wrap up with a short conversation about performance and deployment because that's another thing that you have to do is you can build all these fancy pages, but you got to push them into production. So how do we do that in a way that makes sense? And then I'm also making a big assumption that some of you out there are using one of the big 3 frameworks, Vue, Angular, React, not necessarily in that order, but there is built-in support in Tailwind for all those frameworks and a couple more that you probably have never heard of. So we'll talk about that. And then, we'll just answer some questions. We can play through some examples, and there's a lot that I'm glossing over. So this is the shout out to the Tailwind CSS documentation. What I love about their documentation is whenever I'm working heavily with doing a design, Tailwind documentation is open and it is quick and easy to get to exactly what you need to see in the docs. I love shouting out good documentation. Microsoft docs are amazing. The MDN docs, Mozilla Development Network docs are amazing. Tailwind docs are amazing. You should spend as much time in there as you can. You'll absorb a ton of useful information. All right, let's talk about positioning and basically layout. Yes.
You said to interrupt you if you need to. So
no, go ahead.
And you also said we're not going to talk about Bootstrap anymore, but that's my first question. So I just want to make sure we get the right mindset of what we're going to talk about here. Yep. So is Tailwind a replacement for something like Bootstrap or material design, or could it be used in conjunction with one of the other CSS frameworks?
No, you could use it in conjunction. It's much less opinionated. So let's compare it to material. Material is a little bit better. So material is very opinionated. It looks and works a certain way. They give you the framework to implement the Google way. It's sort of like Bootstrap. Bootstrap's the same idea. Here's a framework to implement the Bootstrap theme, and that's why all the sites look basically the same. You can tell when a Bootstrap site has not been altered anyway. Material does the exact same thing. Now, as soon as you take material and you determine, I don't want the material input box to look like it does, and you want to change it a little bit, it's going to fight you. And because you're going outside of their framework. So if you try to implement your own styles on top of it, it might work now. It might be overridden by something later. They kind of want you to stay inside of their box. Now, like materials, a good example, they give you a pretty good framework for changing things like themes and whatnot. So if you don't like the color or the text of something, that's pretty straightforward to go in and change. But you're still working inside that box. And as soon as you decide something doesn't work the way that you want it to, it's going to fight you. Tailwind, so that is a done for you framework, and you're going to get something that looks like everything else. Tailwind, on the other hand, is more nothing's done for you. Every element that you start with with Tailwind basically looks like how my demo looked a moment ago. It was just simple text that had no styling at all. The default thing that Tailwind does is apply a CSS reset to your entire page. So everything looks like nothing. Even to the extent where paragraph tags, H1, H2, H3, H4 tags are all the same font size because it resets everything to this baseline 0. And then what you do is you go out and you start building on top of that, because you know what it's like building a building. You know what color siding you want. You know what color shutters or what type of windows you want. What color should the roof be? Should it be an architectural shingle or a modern blah 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 shingle? It gives you the tools to do that in a sane way that allows you to build custom components that you can reuse all over the place. But you're basically starting from square one. And Bootstrap is more towards the material side. They're giving you the tools to make your apps look like how their apps look. the clients I go into, they never want their stuff to really look like anyone else's stuff. They all have their own custom looks that they want. I can show a couple examples a little bit later of client apps I've worked on where we've gone in with Tailwind and we've implemented custom designs. And it's taken us a fraction of the time to do that work. Whereas if we were having to write that CSS ourselves, it would have taken forever to do some of that work. So when we talk Tailwind, we're basically starting from nothing and moving up from there. Now, you could take Tailwind and implement it into a Bootstrap or Material Design app. Because you can doesn't mean you should. Tailwind's not going to conflict with the, well, how do I say this? You're not going to have a problem with Tailwind. You're going to have a problem with Material or with Bootstrap. Because if there's any collision there, they're going to want to win. Or if you try to do something or override one of them, they'll push back against it. So nothing. Actually, I have a couple cases where I've used it against older Bootstrap, and you have to be very careful with style collisions. But for the most part, we're starting fresh with Tailwind in the apps that we're going into. All right.
Gotcha. Thank you.
We'll show a couple examples as we go along. All right. Let's talk for a moment about the box model, because this really starts to define the visual language of Tailwind. You've all probably have seen this image before. It's in the dev tools for any Chromium-based browser. Firefox has its own pretty version of it as well. And Safari, no one's using. You have content that just kind of lives in the middle of the screen. And from that content, you can have some padding that kind of pushes basically the border away or the margin away from the content. We can have border. So 1 pixel border is what people commonly use, but you can use thicker borders if you want. And then you have margin that pushes other content away from us. And it's actually kind of a fine line of, well, do I adjust the margin on one element or the padding on a second element? Or do I add a border? Do I do this? Do I do that? What I want to do is I want to talk about how Tailwind starts to define this visual language for defining all the different aspects of this box model. Because this is the stuff that I use the most often when building out various layouts. So let's start with an element. And let's just say I have a div on the screen. It's represented by this blue box on the screen. And I want to add some padding around the box. So padding being on the left, the right, the top, and the bottom. Well, the visual language of Tailwind is that I could tell it to set padding with P to 5. And there's a scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to like 64 to 96 that they represent these gradual stop points. And I'll show you a graphic here in a moment. But when I say padding 5, that tells Tailwind that I want to have padding top 5. I want padding bottom 5, padding left, padding right 5, and it all magically works. If I want to be more specific, I could say I just want the top to be 5. So padding top 5. That's the CSS I would write. In Tailwind, I just say PT5, padding top 5. All right. So hopefully you're like, Kevin, this is dumb easy. Please move on. Show us more. Well, let's talk about the next part of the language. If I wanted to say padding bottom 5, what do you think that CSS class would be?
PB.
Not everyone. PB. Oh, that's a good guess. PB and J. There we go. PB5 does padding on the bottom. All right. Here's the kicker. What if I wanted to do padding left?
PL.
PL. All right. Everyone. Geez. All right. That was the curveball. It is PL. And PR. So you could say PL, PR, and you could set the padding on the left and the right. Now, there are cases when you might want to set the padding on both the left and the right. And you could just say PL5 or PR5. But then there's a shortcut. Because PL and PR are on the X axis, I could just say PX5. And I get both the left and right in just one class call. All right. That works for left and right. What about top and bottom? What do you think that class name would be?
PY.
Toga, it's like you have sat through this talk before. You know all the answers. So there you go. That's exactly right. If I want the top and the bottom, I would just say PY5, and it would automatically set those values for me. All right. So that was the conversation for padding. Now, what if I wanted to move to margin, and I wanted to have a margin of 5 around the entire box. Who wants to guess what the class for margin of 5 would be? Paul's got it. M5 would do the exact same thing. So the same criteria. If I said MX5, it'd be just left and right. I could say MT5, it would just be the top, and so on. So once you understand this little mechanism, you can just go through and set your padding and your margin accordingly across any element on the screen. Now we can continue this a little bit more with, say, widths. So if padding is P and margin is M, width should be, I'm just going to say it's W. And there's a couple other breakpoints that we can get into with width specifically. So you see on the left side of the screen, there's width 24, there's width 32, 40, so on, so on. These are predetermined breakpoints that Tailwind defines for you. So there's a value associated with W96 that works the same on every single browser. Now, if you ever find yourself in a place where you need something bigger than a width 96, you could actually go in and tell Tailwind what that should be. Or you need something in between W80 and W96. You can tell Tailwind what those values are, and it's going to automatically work. We'll see this in a little bit where we create our own custom values. But the cool thing about widths is you don't have to use the fixed width values. You can do relative width values. So the screenshot on the right, we see this in action. We kind of saw this in the example a little bit earlier. If I said W1/2 or 1/2 width, I'm telling Tailwind that I want that width to be 50% of the container that the element is inside of. So I can kind of create my own little pseudo grid system here. So half and half. If I want content on the left side and content on the right side, that's how I can accomplish it. But sometimes you want a little bit more flexibility than that. So we could go down to maybe, well, there's a 1/5 and then 4/5, or I want 1/5, 1/5, 3/5. We can combine these different sizes any way that we want to. Or we have the full width or 100% width, which is just W full. And Tailwind's going to sit here and it's going to do all the math calculations for you. So you don't have to worry about that stuff. So if you need to do 6 columns of 1, 6, 1, 6, 1, 6, so on, you don't have to figure out that, well, what's the percentage of 1/6? And yeah, I wouldn't be able to do that math off the top of my head. Let's dive into some examples. Actually, no, we're not. We're gonna do a cool example in a moment. Let's talk about colors first, because then I'll do a cool example. Following that visual language, if I want to do something like changing the background color, there's pre-built classes in Tailwind for changing the color to different various reds, greens, blues, yellows, purples, so on, so on, so on. And not only are there the raw colors, so just a bright maroon red, but you can do gradients along the way. So this is a language that you'll see in Bootstrap. Or, I said Bootstrap. I shouldn't have said Bootstrap. It's Tolga's fault making me talk about Bootstrap. I meant Tailwind. So in Tailwind, we could say background red 50, and that's a light shade of red. And we can play with a little bit depending on what we're trying to stylize. And Tailwind's going to take care of what those colors mean for us. Now, I could do the exact same thing with text colors or border colors. I could say text green 500, and that's a certain color green in the Tailwind ecosystem. I could do the same thing with borders. I don't have a slide for it, but I could say border purple and border purple 400, and I'll get a certain shade of purple when I do that. Now, 9 times out of 10, well, that's just a number I picked out of my butt. You will work with a company that has a branding guide. So, Tolga, I know the company you work for. You have very specific colors that you use for your brand, right?
Absolutely.
So, what if you were using Tailwind and you're selling Advanced, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, like Advanced has a specific red and a specific yellow, right?
Very specific RGB value. You better not use anything else.
Exactly. So if you were looking at the Tailwind reds, and we go back, those reds don't match at all the Advanced Auto red. So you would find yourself in a place where, all right, I'm going to have to do a custom red in order to make the higher ups happy, or at least not mad at me. Well, you can do that in Tailwind because I had mentioned earlier that everything in Tailwind should be behind a build system. And the biggest part about that is that Tailwind will do a lot of custom elements for you automagically. So here's a good example. You have a custom color that you want to give a name. Let's say advanced auto red or advanced auto yellow or any other color in the suite. You go into this file. It's Tailwind's configuration file. I can show you a real example in a moment, but they all look like this. And you tell it that you want to define a color and you give it a proper name. So this is a name that means something to you, to your coworkers, to anyone that would be reading this code. And you define what that RGB value should be. And what Tailwind will do is it will automatically create the class definitions for that color that you can reuse anywhere in your application. So I have an example color here, a poo, which is a lovely shade of brown. And if I want to use that color in my application, I just simply use the same language that we had talked about earlier. Text poo creates text that is the proper shade of poo. Background BG poo creates text that's a proper shade of poo. Last client I used Tailwind on exclusively, we went through and did this. They had a certain color blue and a certain color orange that was in their style guide. We created the definitions for those. And then anywhere I would say Causeway blue, Causeway orange, and it would just magically work. It would figure out the correct colors.
I hope you're not giving away any trade secrets here and disclosing the proper attribute and color tone of poo there.
No, well,
you should be in trouble.
I just pulled up a color picker. I'm going, what's the dirtiest looking brown I could find? This was it. So I just went with it. So no trade secrets. All right. Let's talk about variants. So this is a topic that will lead us into an actual example of using Tailwind all over the place. So variants are different states of an element. So hover, active, disabled, etc. So let's assume I have a button on the screen and I'm styling like this. So button has a background of pink 300. So it's not a bright pink, but it's not a soft pink. I want to make this turn a different color whenever I hover over the button. If you're writing that in CSS, it's actually not all, it's straightforward. It's not all that difficult. You create a hover variant of the class name or the element name, and you tell it, all right, change the color to purple. In Tailwind, we do something very similar. So you can see here, I still have my background pink, but I'm adding a hover colon, which means it's a variant. I'm saying, well, when the hover effect applies, I want to set the background the purple 300. So I get this fancy little button that has a purple background. Let's see that. Let's talk about this in action. So we'll actually get into some code and see what happens. So I'm going to close some screens here. This is, did NPM just die on me? It started NPM and just walked away, and apparently it didn't like that. All right, let's go ahead and open this up in VS Code. Yep, I trust myself. If you're interested, I'm using Vite or Vite or VITE build system for building this project. I use Vue because I love Vue, but you don't necessarily have to understand Vue to understand how any of this stuff works. All you have to understand is I have an element on the screen that has no styling at all associated with it. We're going to npm run dev, and I'm going to open this in another browser. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so everyone can see what's going on. So we can do some work here. My button has no background color. So someone out there pick a random color. Alice blue. Brett over here being super specific. I don't have Alice blue, but I have blue. So we'll just do blue 500 and we'll hit save. So now I have a blue button, right? You know what? That's not good enough for me. We're going to make some padding on it. Yep, too much. I'm also going to set the rounded corners. No, let's make them larger, more rounded.
Thanks, Kevin, for trying to match it to my shirt.
Hey, oh yeah, super close. Should do the color picker just to see. All right, so I have a rounded button. That's awesome. All right, let's just say what happens when I hover. Let's change the background to give me a different color that's not blue. Don't say slate just because it's on the screen. That's still a shade of blue. All right, I'm just going for green. Sorry, I'll take too long. I'm going to set the background color to green whenever we hover. Puke green. Yeah, it's puke enough, right? All right, we're close enough. Also, if you're wondering, I'm using a plugin for Tailwind in VS Code. It's the official plugin. It does two things. The first one is it gives you IntelliSense of your class names as you type. It also, when you save, it will alphabetize and order your class names correctly. So here you can see all my class names are alphabetical order. It puts all my hovers together. If I had active, inactive states, it would put all those together as well. So it makes it very easy to read all your classes. All right, so but I have hover, and now if I go over here, watch my mouse, a hover effect, and that's really cool. Ooh, hover, hover, hover. Now we can change more than one thing with a hover effect. I could say hover. We could change the text to white whenever we hover because maybe it doesn't look right. And see that it changes both those effects. If I brought up the DevTools and showed you what's happening here, you can see that this is another nice thing about Tailwind is the CSS I have in the DevTools matches exactly the CSS I have in my code. I hate platforms that basically rewrite my HTML and my CSS to match whatever they want to do. So it makes it more difficult for me to debug my code. Here we don't necessarily have that problem. So here I have I can add, change the color. I can add properties that don't exist. So I already had a blue. I already had a default color. Let's say I want to animate ping. So boom, boom, boom. Wouldn't really do that on hover. It doesn't make much sense on a hover, but it's cool to look at. It also shows you that there's a bunch of other stuff built into Tailwind that I'm not going to talk about, like animate, animate pulse. It's kind of, I don't know how well this is coming over the screens here, but it's kind of pulsing opacity in and out. But that's kind of cool. All right, screen share is good. Thank you. So we're not writing any CSS at all to achieve this flow. Now, the big question I get next is, Kevin, that's a whole lot of CSS you've written on one element for one button. Now, what if I wanted multiple buttons? Let's go ahead and let's take this button. Build, add 4 or 5 buttons here. All right, well, they all work the same way on the screen, but they all have these massive number of classes, and it can get worse. I've have some buttons that have at least a dozen or 2 different classes on it because there's different things that I want to add. So notice I don't have any margin in between. So I could say M2 to add a little bit of margin between my class. Oh, so this is a whole nother problem. I want to change one, but I really need to change them all. So I have to go through and change all the different buttons directly. Kevin, are you going to make me write this much CSS? Are these class names for all my different elements? And the answer is no, we're not going to do that. We are going to actually clean this up a little. So here's another concept. I'm going to go and open up a CSS file. Now, I told you I wasn't going to write CSS, but I'm lying a little bit. This is for the sake of reusability. Now, this is my index.css file, the main CSS file for the app. It's pulling in all the Tailwind components. This is part of the setup that I said I was going to skip over, so you can ignore that. What's nice about this file is Tailwind will parse it before actually rendering out the CSS that gets embedded into your page. Now I'm going to create a new layer, just called components. You can give it any name you want. And I want to define my own class name. We'll just call it button for lack of a better term. And when I use this class name button, what I wanted to do is really apply all these different classes. So I'll copy that long string, a list of string. I'm going to say @apply. I'll paste all these CSS in there. I'm going to do a quick format. And there's a couple squigglies. Yeah, we can ignore those. Those aren't a big deal. So I have the CSS called button. I'm going to replace button and hit save. Oops. I did wrong. Layer components. That's right. That button. All right, hold on, folks. What's the error? Oh, hold on. I think I know why. because I think it added a space. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Copy and paste, and the auto format screwed me up. All right. So I have the first button. That's just button. And the rest of them have that old syntax, but they all still work exactly as we expect them to. And if we were to go into our dev tools, we can see, and I'm going to zoom in here. Oh, I zoomed too much. You can see I have button, and then I have all the other classes. So, and then if I look at button hover, you can see all the stuff that Tailwind's doing underneath the scenes. So I can clean up this a lot by just replacing these all with button and do that across the board. So button, button, and then finally button. Do a format. It's much easier to read. Do a refresh just to show I'm not faking it. They all have the exact same button class, which we can see right here. They're all buttons. And what's even nicer about this is now you get that email from a boss that says, well, the background can't be blue anymore. It needs to be pink. So we'll change it to pink. So every button that has button associated with it now is pink and a lovely shade of green. So this is what we do whenever we'll sit down and we'll figure out what an element should look like. We'll take the content of it. We'll create our own class name that basically is just applying Tailwind classes. And we can add other custom CSS to this if we wanted to. So if I knew the CSS for what font, I'm trying to, is this not going to work on me? So font size 15 point. Oh yeah, it works. If you know CSS that you want to write that you don't necessarily want to try to figure out the Tailwind for it, you just want to use a specific CSS style, you can still use those and still get the benefit of all the other Tailwind stuff. We'll go and clear that. So everything's back to normal. All right. Now I've already talked about, so this is what I just talked about. So responsive design. Let's talk responsive design for a moment. I'm going to reuse this button example. I'm going to knock it down to just the one button. And what I want to play around with is let me set up this example. All right, I'm going to take all these classes out of the CSS class so I can make them point. I have one button that applies all these different things. And when you are dealing with web pages, the big thing you have to deal with is viewport size. You've probably heard the term before, mobile first, and that same idea applies here. When you're building out the layout of a page, you should really start from the smallest mobile viewport, and you design for mobile viewports that grow in size. In Tailwind, you actually have 4 viewports. You have small. So actually, let's get rid of this button for a minute. We have, let's see, div class. I'm going off script a little bit, so please bear with me. So we'll just say small. And small only applies when the viewport is, hold on. I have a better example of this. Let me find it real fast. Oh, no, I don't. I took it out. Oh, all right. All right. I'm going to ad hoc this because I completely forgot to push a demo up to the GitHub repo, and I shouldn't have. All right. So I'm a teapot. I have an element on the screen. We're going to set the background color to blue. And we're going to say blue is the default color for the mobile viewport. So if I'm watching on a phone, blue is the default color. But if we grow a little bit in size, let's say we're on a tablet, we want the color to change from blue to pink. So we'll say pink 500. I'm going to use the variant medium to designate that the viewport has grown a little bit in size. And yeah, Toga got my joke. Thank you, Toga. We're going to say the viewport has grown in size. And when the viewport has grown in size, we want to change the background color. So we can see as we grow a little bit in size, it goes from blue to oh, I'm zoomed in. Let me zoom out. Yeah, fun fact, if you're zoomed in Chromium, anything, it screws with the breakpoints. So all right, so blue, 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 and eventually you get to a point where, oh, now I'm in medium viewport, so it goes to pink. And pink is the new default. So if I go all the way out, it's always going to be pink. Now, let's set another one for large. Let's say when we go large, we'll go slate 500. And since we're here, we'll also do extra large, which will be background green. We'll do green 300. So we have the various breakpoints for our viewports. And we can see as we zoom, basically resize in, out, these different colors will take effect to show that we're changing our layout. Now we can make this a little bit more complicated, and I'm going to try to do this off the top of my head. So let's delete all this stuff and let's create a simple, so we have a div here, and this div is going to have some content inside of it. Let's write some lorem ipsum. And what I want to do, I want to take this class, I'm going to put them side by side, or one right at the other. We'll put this inside of a parent div. And in the mobile view, I want to have these kind of stacked on top of each other because they would be really difficult to read if it was a 2-column layout, right? Well, what if, as we grow a little bit in size, when we hit 2-column, or a width that would support 2-column a little bit better, what if this just automatically went from 100% width to maybe half width? Well, we could do that. So we could say, well, the default width of this element is full, but if we hit medium, I want the width to be 1/2. And if I do that for both these classes, you can see, oh, it's actually doing that. So the width is 1/2 on both these cases. That's actually kind of cool. And then once we hit the small breakpoint again, it goes back to width full. And let me take this, let me knock down this margin so I get rid of the scroll bar. All right, so scroll, scroll, scroll. Now we're full. All right. Well, ideally, I wouldn't want these to be side by side. So let's play with our little friend Flexbox. You probably heard of Flexbox before. Flexbox is interesting. Oh, wrong one. We'll put flex on our class, and we'll see, oh, I have my div side by side. And that's actually doing what I want, but it's in the wrong viewport. I really want it only for medium. But because we said mobile first, it's going to assume I want flex on all viewports. So here we'll say medium flex. If I have one, let's differentiate this a little bit. So we'll say red 700, and then down here we'll do red. I'm sorry, green. You can see what's what. Then as I zoom out a little, flex will kick in, and it will position both these elements accordingly. So this is really cool because I spend a lot of time doing Flexbox by hand, and it drives me crazy because it's simple when you're done, but it's not simple when you're actually trying to write and make it work the first time. I find the implementation in Tailwind to be so much easier. I will show you an actual client app because I'm coming to my hour, so I want to wrap this up for some questions. So I did a site for Causeway Solutions, and we had to do exactly this, where they paid me to do that pop-up. I did not do that on my own free will. I'm so sorry. I know that we as people hate the pop-ups, but they wanted to have a section like this where you have element 1, element 2, element 3. But if I'm on mobile, we want that stuff side by side because this format does not look good on a mobile device. If you have them side by side, just it's ugly. So we have breakpoints in there for a medium, where if we're on a tablet, it all combines correctly. And then as you go to a mobile device, it stacks on top of each other. So we get those natural layouts that we want to, but we don't spend a ton of time having to figure out what the combination of Flexbox styles is. And then the code for this is pretty straightforward. And actually, I did this before. This was the first major project I did in Tailwind, so don't tell anyone about that. But you can see here, I have flex, and then I have conditions for large, If we go down, there's conditions for medium, because we want to customize how things look based off of whatever the viewport size is. All right. Let's see.
Quick
Any
question.
questions? Yeah.
Is that flex there like the standard, HTML flex, or is it something with Tailwind? Is
No,
it like,
it's the standard HTML or CSS Flexbox.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Which won against? So there was Flexbox and there was CSS Grid. Yeah, I think that's right. But Flexbox won because it was, I don't know, more popular. But guaranteed to work on all current generation browsers. Don't try to run this stuff on IE 7 or anything. Like, if you're still supporting that, I'm sorry. Might work in IE 11. What's that?
I don't think 9 supported it either. I know at one point we couldn't run Flexbox because it didn't support. I want to say IE 9.
Yeah,
and it wasn't supported, so we couldn't use Flexbox because of that. But I guess that's a good question to ask the group here. That's like, does anybody still have objections? Any company you guys here that still have objections to using Flexbox? Because I'd love to get back into using Flexbox instead. That's awesome. Sounds like nobody.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
So wrapping this up, let's talk about just framework support, because odds are you're using something existing like Vue, Angular, React. There's a full set of support for those. Let's see. You know what? Let me just go to components. So I actually pay for this, but there's a bunch of free components as well. So this is kind of the solution to what Bootstrap would try to do, but I actually think it does it a little bit better. So if we go in here, let's go to their previews. Oh, they have a much better layout. All right, I'm going to sign in because I want you to see what they have. Because you always get to the point in a project where you say, well, I really just need to do a stylized header, or I want to have a fly out menu, something like that. Well, what's great about Tailwind's UI is they give you all these different components, and they give it to you in a couple different flavors. Now, there's some of these that are free. There are some that are paid. I actually highly recommend getting the paid ones if you're going to do Tailwind seriously, just because I have saved myself so much time by just copying and pasting their code. So if you see what you like, say, all right, I like this little drop-down menu. This is cool. Oh, here's another one. Oh, here's a much simpler one. We'll actually go with this one. But I want to have this little pop-up menu. And how do you do that? Well, I can go look at the code. And now this looks complicated because they have all their stuff in there. But what they're trying to show you is here are the combination of Tailwind classes. No special CSS is being written. It's just using out-of-the-box Tailwind. This is how we define all these different properties. And the other cool thing they do is, and what this is actually how I wish Bootstrap would have done it, is they don't give you any JavaScript. So they'll tell you, well, if you want to show or hide the menu, you basically apply or unapply different classes. So it might be something as simple as show what's it called in Tailwind? It's visible or hidden. Or if you want the fancy effect, which this has the fancy little fade in effect or fade out effect, they tell you what classes to apply in order to achieve those results. So if you're writing your own in Vue, React, Angular, whatever, you know that you could conditionally add or remove classes based off of different conditions. Now, odds are if you're using React, Angular, or Vue, you might just want to use, oh, they don't have Angular ones in here. Well, no one's using Angular anyway, so let's not worry about that. I just offended someone, and I'm so sorry, but I meant every word of it. If you're using a proper framework like Vue, you get built-in components that you could just download and use, and they take care of all the fancy things for you. So maybe you're not cultured and you're using React. I know I just offended more people. I'm so sorry. Yeah, everyone's dropping out now. So React's the same way. So this is actually a great use case for Vue. Like, look how much less code there is for Vue and how much easier to read that is over React. I'm sorry, I'm biased and it's showing. All right, so you have the custom components in here. I highly recommend it. It's all good. I'm going to jump out of this just because I'm not trying to sell Tailwind UI. I think it's a great add-on because they've done a lot of this work for you, and I get monthly emails from them basically saying this is the new stuff we've added, so you should go take a look. So let's lastly, I usually only have a chance to do this in my when I do this talk live, but let's talk about deployment. One of the things that Tailwind does for you is it integrates with your build system. So let's bring up my app here. I have a Tailwind configuration. So this is what we saw earlier. You see my example poo. This is where I grabbed the screenshot from. Tailwind runs through a build system to build out all of its stuff. So if you're running, say React CLI, Angular CLI, Webpack natively, we could just say npm run build. And what this will do, what Tailwind will do, is it will go through all the CSS that I'm actually using. So it's going to look at all my files. So this one in particular, this is the only one really using anything. It's going to see, all right, he's using MD Flex, he's using M2, W full, so on, so on. And it's only going to spit out the CSS for those elements that I'm using. It's smart about this work. So if we were to go into, let's see how well this demo works. Oh, it's in my VS Ignore or my Git Ignore. So open this in VS Code. Go. So if we open up that CSS, to a format, you can see how little stuff there is in this CSS file, but it's everything I need to make my app work. So this is all the reset. So if I get down here to the bottom, you'll see my M10 from margin rounded. Border 2, border blue. Looks like there's some other stuff from other examples. But this is only pulling in the code that I need to ship this. It's not putting extraneous CSS in my build. So I highly recommend that if you're using Tailwind, you put it as part of a build system. There's instructions for every major platform that you would naturally want to use Tailwind on. If you're home growing your own Webpack, it's not going to be fun. It's totally doable and something that should do, but you shouldn't also roll your own Webpack. A lot of people do that. Do not recommend that at all. But so yeah, this deliverable is super small, and as I add more stuff, naturally it's going to grow, but it's only going to use what I need. If we were embedding Tailwind as a whole, we would be talking about like multi-megabytes worth of CSS. And you don't want to ship that down to the browser, even with a caching solution in place. What you want to do is only bring down the CSS that you're honestly going to use. So I'm at a stopping point. Yep, I talked about all this stuff, framework support. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me. Happy to have conversation, answer any questions that you might have while I'm still here. So thank you. I've done pissed off all the React and Angular people. Sorry about that.
Hey, I have a question.
You just threw mud against React and Angular.
Does it support floats?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Does Tailwind support floats?
So floating elements on the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So hold on, let me find the docs. So this tailwindcss.com. So let's type in float. Here you go. Float right, float left. Example of what you want to do. This is why I say the elements. I'm sorry, the documentation is amazing because it'll show you exactly what they support. They'll give you the example of all the classes and then everything in action.
I see.
And as you can tell, I could not talk about all of Tailwind in this talk. It's really picking the most common stuff I use and I've seen other people use. But then there's a lot to be said for, hey, just go experiment with some of the stuff yourself and see what they have. Oh, I forgot to add shadows to the buttons. I should have added a shadow to the button because I did rounded corners. My mistake. All right, I'll come back next month and I'll do that.
Yeah, well, thank you.
You sure? That was a good question.
Yeah.
One of the things that people really loved about Bootstrap was the grid system. And I will still admit, like, the grid system Bootstrap was great at the time that it came out. Tailwind does have the concept of a grid system. I actually don't use it because I find it's easier to do layouts with flex and widths a little bit easier than using a defined grid. But all that stuff exists in the framework. If you're used to grid systems and you want to be held to a grid system, you could totally do that. Somewhere in here, yeah, like grids. So you can see there's a whole grid system built into it. All right, everybody.
Yeah, definitely has extensive documentation and lots of components. I do like the components. Is there like other commercial packages that also sell for different components, or would you just go buy, the components from Tailwind's?
I think the Tailwind ones are really good because they're not even trying to sell you a package of pre-built components that you can't overwrite. They're basically just giving you templates to use and customize. So I'd shown the Causeway. So we have this little flyout menu. I think it was Tailwind components. I had found the example for a flyout menu, and I adapted it to use their colors, and it made it a little bit simpler. But this was one of those things where I'm like, all right, I understand the theory, but I don't remember how to do the implementation. I could have spent a couple hours figuring it out, but I went to Tailwind UI and just said, all right, copy, paste, change. That's what we're really good at as developers, copy, paste, change. And Tailwind embraces that with all their stuff. I got into and the thing is, like, they keep raising the price on the components because they keep adding more to it. So I bought early and they just keep adding more and more stuff to my subscription. Or it's not even subscription, it's lifetime subscription. I don't ever have to pay for it again.
Yeah, I do like that lifetime access. Yeah, so I looked at the pricing as of this video or this meetup. It's $2.99 per person lifetime. That's not outrageous. It's not cheap.
They also have team prices as well. So if you have a team of people that you want to use it, when I got in,
that's what I was gonna say. $7.99 for up to 25 people. That's reasonable.
Yeah.
I think the personal one is slightly higher than what I was kind of thinking it would be, but the team price is less than what I'm thinking. So for $7.99, you can get lifetime access. Period. There's unlimited projects, whatever. Lifetime access. You get all the updates lifetime for a team of 25 people. I think that's very reasonable. That's big enough to fit in like a P card.
Yeah.
You don't have to go further and go into procurement and all of that. So
I bought it. It was less than 200 when I bought it. It was like, all right, I know I'm going to use this. I don't have a use case for it now, so I bought it, and then I easily made that money back as soon as I bought it. So yeah, because I spent so much time. I actually used to spend a lot of time in Bootstrap trying to find Bootstrap implementations for different components. And usually what happens is you type price matrix Bootstrap, and you get some guy on some random like code pin says, oh, here's an implementation, and well, it's only for a very specific version of Bootstrap and you're using something newer. No, your clients do not have to a runtime license. It's technically, that's a great question. I don't remember the exact licensing issues if you do the individual license. Hold on, let me read. Yeah, it grants an individual, so I'm the individual. And also, you turn off the recording so I can say what I really have.
Okay, so I'll wrap it up here with the video, and then we can continue chatting if you'd like. So again, thank you very much, Kevin, for coming in and showing us Tailwind CSS. I think being able to design web applications, CSS is key, and I consider CSS on par or even more important than the application itself, because without any code at all, you can have a awesome looking website from the get-go, and then you just have to instrument the data, right? So the other way around, you can have the most awesome application in the world without proper styling. It's going to look and not feel very good for the user. So
all right, so you nice. Keep the recording on for a moment. I'm going to show you all. So this is the site I worked on.
Now, all right, thank you everybody for joining. We're going to join again October 6th next Next session will be October 6th. That's another Thursday, and we're going to be looking at C# 10 new features. So please come and join. Thank you.